and welcome to our next program of Lexington Remembers. Today is Wednesday, October 26, 2011, and we're in the home of Mary Gillespie. Mary started this program 7 or 8 years ago, and she usually does the interviewing, but we're doing it today. And my name is Beverly Kelley, this is my husband Peter, and we are very happy to have Jim Freeman with us today. Jim,
we're honored to have Jim.
We're honored and happy, both, to have Jim with us today. Jim is a
He is thrilled to be here.
Jim is thrilled to be here. Jim is a lifelong resident of Lexington,
Not
so
yet.
he can tell us a lot about growing up in town and what things were like and how things have changed. But also, he was the owner of Jefferson Union, which was one of the few manufacturing companies in Lexington. It was on Fletcher Avenue, and he owned it for many, many years. And he's going to tell us about Jefferson Union as well as living in Lexington. So I think with that brief introduction, I'll turn it over to Peter, and Peter can start asking Jim some questions.
First of all, Jim, thanks very much for showing up today. A little rainy and drizzly, but a good day to be here. Better been so indoors than outdoors, I think. And Jim, besides being a good old Lexingtonian, 92 years, right, Jim?
Not till next match.
Oh, okay, sorry, 91 and real close to 92. Was a childhood friend of my mother's, who's also close to be 92. We were classmates together through elementary school and the high school, graduated in the class of
1937.
That's right, 1937. And Jim, let's start off by saying, where did you grow up in town? Where did you live?
I was born on 55 Bedford Street. And if you don't know where that is, if you go up past Bedford Street on the Hancock Street side, as you go up past the fire stations over at the lumber company, there are 4 stucco 2-family houses. And the second one up from the center, I was born in the front room on the first floor in that house, March 12, 1920. And my mother's came from the Cape. And you'll hear a lot of Cape Cod from me, because unlike the people who nowadays go to the Cape for a holiday, my mother always had us there because that was home and that's where her parents were. And the first time I went to Cape was in June of 1920 as a babe in arms with my older brother and sister. And we went the way you always went to the Cape then. You went by train from the Lexington Depot into the North Station, and you got out and you found your way somehow to get to the South Station. You had to either take trolley cars or get a car team or whatever was available.
Still a connecting problem today.
And then you go on to get on the New York to Haven, Hartford, and go to the Chatham. And for your information, at that time the railroad took passengers all the way from Boston to Chatham. So when you get to Chatham, you get out, and if you were lucky, and my mother was fortunate that day, she had 2 little kids, a baby, luggage, and she'd been going from train to trolley to train to, and she was having a great time, I can imagine, although it didn't
Remember those
me, I
days.
had no problem at all. And then when she got there, if she was fortunate, Abby Nickerson, who was then called Abby Donut, because everybody in Chatham is named Nickerson, and Abby Donut would be there with his team, and he would drive mother and her children up to her parents' home in Chatham-Port, then called Chatham-Port, which is, if you know Chatham at all, it's just north of North Chatham. And Chatham-Port, once upon a time, had a post office. My grandfather, for a while, was the postmaster.
Oh, is that right?
So
Okay.
that's Chatham. You don't want Chatham. You want
No,
Lexington.
I mean, that was a good, that was an interesting
How
story.
long did you live at that house on Bedford Street?
Right, did you move to?
Don't get married. No.
Oh.
We moved to, my folks bought a house on Parker Street, 6 Parker Street.
The house is still there.
And I moved with them.
Mm-hmm.
So you grew up at 6 Parker Street.
I grew up at 6 Parker Street.
And in those days, you walked to school at the Hancock School, right?
Hancock School, and you walked down Parker Street till you came to the terrace. Belfry Terrace, is that?
That's it, Belfry
Yep,
Terrace.
yep.
Yeah, and turned right in there and crossed through somebody's, it was a backyard.
Oh, you
there.
mean Jackson Court? You went
Jackson
down.
Court, that's what I
Right, you went
meant.
down Parker Street, down Jackson Court, and cut through somebody's
Cut through
backyard.
somebody's
Kids still
backyard.
do that today.
and
Get to the
went
sun.
to Hancock School, and that's what we did. And
How about some of the friends that you had on Parker Street? Can you
Well,
remember any of them?
yeah, I remember the one family we were closest to, I suppose, were the Manleys. And all of you probably may remember John Manley, who was a salesman, real estate salesman for Bill Lyon, and he was the oldest son. And there were two other sons and a daughter, and the youngest son was Jimmy. And if you got the picture of the kid standing with his on top of the pile, that's Jim.
Okay.
And
Okay.
Jim and I were great friends, and we had a further relationship because, as you notice from his picture, if you look at him, he's a nice-looking, tall young man, and I'm one of the cattle who are underneath him that they're standing on.
And what other friends? The Tennies, I understand you knew?
Nancy Tenney was a classmate then,
And where did she live?
next door to Hancock Church,
Next door to Hancock Church.
going
Okay.
towards the center. And
Right.
she had
Right.
two brothers, I think, and I think Charlie Shue was friendly with one of the Tenney
Oh, that's
boys.
Peter's.
That was my uncle, yeah.
Right,
Yeah, the
okay.
Tennies, yeah, he remembers the Tennies.
Right.
They lived up on, what is it?
Well, the Tennies live next to
They lived next
Hancock
to the
Church.
Hancock Church at that time.
That's right, where,
Worcesters live now. And then on the other side of the church were the Greeleys.
Well,
And
there are
that's
two houses.
two doors
houses
down,
down.
right.
Yeah.
And you graduated with the twins.
That's correct.
Ann and Ellen.
That's correct.
Okay. And then their brother was Roland Greeley, which a lot of people know.
What
Isn't that?
about Roland?
Roland
their-
was
The twins are the youngest.
right,
Right,
yeah,
and
Roland
Roland-
was older than the twins.
Yes.
Right.
And
And
the father was
Dana
older.
was older than them.
Oh,
He
okay.
was older than
I
Roland.
don't, okay, I don't remember
He
Dave.
was he was the minister. He was the president of the Unitarian Universal
Oh, right,
Church.
right,
Okay.
right.
And in my household, my mother was 18 years older than her youngest sister. And her youngest sister came to live with us for a number of years, and she lived in Lexington with us and graduated from Lexington High School, a class of 1925. And since I was an infant, then I had a lot to do with her. That was my auntie.
I was gonna say, yeah, she was babysitting you
She
probably.
babysat for me over years, and as we grew older, we finally went out and we had cocktails together, so,
Well, that was a good plan.
yeah.
What about the Reedies? Didn't the Reedies live on
They live on
Parker Street?
They live down further down there where Michelson lived. Michelson
Yeah,
lived
Dick
on Parker
Michelson
Street.
lived on Parker Street.
Not Dick, it was
Oh.
Harold.
Dick's father lived on.
Harold Michelson lived on Parker Street, and
Yeah.
Schulman, who was Harold's sister, who married a Schulman, she lived there, I think in that Michelson house for years after that, up until maybe 20 years ago. And she
Well,
passed away.
I don't know, 20 years ago, I haven't seen Parker Street for 30 years.
It's not too far away, it's still where it was when you grew up.
Okay,
But the Reedies owned the Reedies men's clothing store uptown, isn't that right?
yes.
I'd like to know, where did you play growing up? Did you play on Belfry Hill?
No,
or...
you don't understand. I'll give it to you as well quickly as I can. When my father was in Lexington, his wife took the kids and they went down to visit her parents for the summer, and he was told to get a house. So he went looking for a house. They lived on Bedford Street in an apartment. They were renting then. He'd just come to town, moved in, he got the job. The thing about the Freemans coming to Lexington is because it was a factory town. I used to enjoy telling this when I was a member of the board of the Historical Society, to tell them that my parents came in because it was a factory town, and they used to
Interesting. Yeah.
bristle, just bristle.
Well, one of the factories, you said your dad came into town to be the bookkeeper or the financial?
He was head bookkeeper and office manager of a new little company that started up in Lexington. He heard about it. They were advertising for an office manager, head bookkeeper, and he was living in Somerville and working in Boston in a bed company. And he heard about this opportunity, and he was blocked from getting anywhere in the bed business because there was a nice old older man who had the job, and he would gotten so that he was kaput there. So he came up here and applied for the job and got it. That was in, I believe, 1911.
And what was the name of that company?
The Jefferson Union Company.
Jefferson
right.
Union. Okay.
There it is.
Right.
And we'll get a picture of that certainly.
And that picture
on
is
the-
probably about 1920. and it was painted by a man who worked in the engineering department, and named of Bert Poole, whose signature was on the painting, on the picture. And I don't know what to call that. It's not a painting that I know of. It's not a drawing. It's not a watercolor. And if somebody can tell me what it is, I would be very happy to hear it. And the frame was made instantly by Larry Whipple,
Oh,
as you
that's
would
interesting.
obviously guess.
Yeah, yeah.
First memories actually were not anything to do with my father and the Jefferson Union. My first memories were my childhood
Sure.
living in Parker Street. And what I wanted to tell you was that my mother was quite thrilled because she told him she wanted to live near the school for the children. That was Hancock School, and she wanted to be near a church. And they were, I don't know, Protestants or Methodists or something. So she didn't care which kind of a Protestant church, but Hancock Church was fine, and the children would be able to walk to church and walk to school without crossing any difficult points. So he did that. One thing that nobody ever told me, and that is when they built the first tennis court in Lexington. Because the first tennis courts in Lexington are right along the backyards of Parker Street.
Right.
And my father was an avid tennis player as a child.
Oh.
And my father really, I don't think my mother ever knew it, but he didn't pick it for the schools and the church, he picked it for the tennis courts. And the only trouble with that story is I'm not just sure when the tennis courts were built.
Well, certainly,
I don't know, but.
certainly you remember them in your childhood.
Oh, yeah. I
Remember your dad playing down there?
Oh,
Did
they
you
were
play
always
tennis?
there, and they added to, I remember they used to be like only two
Yeah.
side by side.
Side by side.
They kept adding to them.
Right, I think there's 10 of them down there now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
They were
had-
clay back in those days probably, right? They had to roll them?
Oh, yeah, they had the little clips that you pushed into the clay
Right,
and
to
hold the tape
Hold
down.
the tape down, right?
And did you play tennis, Jim?
Everybody in Parker Street played tennis. Warren Love, one of the kids in the pyramid, was once the town champion. One of the very fine players, tennis players, was Bobby Michelson, who's Harold's younger brother, a quite short chap. And if you know anything about tennis, he was a real Bobby Riggs. He wasn't very tall, but he run like hell. And he'd get around and play. He was a great tennis player.
Good
My
cover.
brother was a good tennis player. My brother was a good athlete. But my brother in high school played tennis against a man named Gordon Govian, who became a fireman in Lexington, whose mother wrote the book Wings at My Window, the Bird Book, if you know that book. And Gordon was a good tennis player. He was a captain of the tennis team, and he and my brother played high school finals for the best high school tennis player, and Gordon beat my brother, but my brother was the number 2 tennis player in high school. Because side of the courts, all the kids, we all played. I wasn't a good tennis player, but I could hold a racket.
Larry Whipple was quite a tennis player too.
Well, everybody, if you
Right.
live side of the tennis courts, what else are you
Right.
gonna do?
Wow, what other games did you play besides tennis? Did you play baseball, hockey? There was a hockey rink down there, wasn't there?
No,
A
no.
pond?
Oh, no, let's,
Stay with tennis?
you want me to tell you, or you wanna tell me?
You tell me, Jim.
Okay, well, actually, the other thing that you want to remember is that the playground was quite different in those days than it is now. And the playground actually had a brook, a small brook, and I think this was actually largely the residue from the dump on Lincoln Street. But it used to come trickling down Lincoln Street, and the ground was quite firm, and it came down. And where the swimming pool is now was a growth of, I'm going to say alders. I'm not a tree knowledgeable person, but I think they were alders. And then they surrounded this brook, and the brook ran down through the alders. It was a swamp. That's where the swimming pool is now, was a swamp. You mentioned to me something about water, being a lot of water around there in the back of where the lagoon was for the
Right.
25th, 125th. Well,
For the
that's all-
pageant.
That's all wet, and Parker Street is all wet. All that area is, the water table is very close to the surface. So, and that was and my brother, who was quite an outdoor fancier, had read in some boy's book that one of the ways you get water pure was to run it, the book told him to run it through sand.
Right.
But my brother, who apparently was not as careful a reader as he might have been, read it somewhat differently. And he read it, water will clarify itself if you run it over sand.
Oh.
So my brother then got some sand, God knows where he got it, and we put boards down so we could kneel on the boards, because it was pretty muddy in the swamp, and he threw the sand down a little area, not much bigger than this, and we all knelt and drank the water, which was coming down from the Lincoln dump,
Oh.
down Lincoln Street, and through the playground, and we were enjoying the outdoor life, and I'm still here.
We gotta get more of that water around.
Gee.
So
Was there a swimming pool or a swimming
no,
place
there's
in the
not
park?
there, not there, no.
Not while you were a kid, huh?
No, not when I was a kid, no. The lagoon was there, the lagoon for 1925, the
pageant.
celebration, the pageant.
Right.
My aunt, who was graduated from Lexington High School at 1925, she was in the pageant. She was, and so forth. So I was very aware of the pageant. All the girls had costumes, and that was quite an affair, incidentally.
Yes.
I don't hear much about it, but it was a very big deal at the
It
time.
was a big deal
Yeah.
at the time.
And
That's
the
right.
president came and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
was 150th, right?
So that's where we played. We played in the playground.
Okay.
Okay.
Believe
Was
it or
there-
not, we living on Parker Street could play in the playground.
It's okay. Yeah, was there a tennis? Okay. Was there a baseball field down there?
More or less over where the grandstand was, the track.
Right.
Where the track is more
Well,
or
we
less.
talked the other day about how Worthing Road certainly wasn't there when you were growing
No,
up.
it wasn't.
Lincoln Street was there and
Yeah.
Park Drive that went,
Yeah,
the road that went
and
through Parker Street.
there's a street that backs up Hastings Park.
Right. Yeah, that's
Oh.
Hastings.
Not out of
Hastings
Monroe, there's one up
Hastings.
Hastings Road.
Hastings Road, yeah, before Audubon.
That was there.
Lincoln Street came down to Massachusetts
Mass-
Avenue, right at the
Mass
fort.
Avenue, yeah.
Right. And that changed.
I was told by a lady who lived there many years ago, elderly lady, that once upon a time in that area, Massachusetts Avenue was a corduroy road. And if you don't know what a corduroy road is, the corduroy road are logs, and it has the appearance of corduroy.
Right, right.
So your road went over and a little bub, 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 bub.
Is that right? Well, it's probably because it was so wet and swampy,
Yes,
because they laid the
absolutely.
logs there
Yeah,
to get across.
From Dana home, from the Dana home, all the way down that whole side of Mass Avenue was wet.
Yeah.
And you don't remember the corduroy road?
I do not remember the
No.
corduroy. I remember corduroy pants, but not corduroy.
Was Parker Street always paved when you were a boy, or was it dirt?
As far as I remember, it was always paved.
Okay.
There were beautiful horse chestnut trees right along the side of Parker Street. You know what
Yeah,
a
a lot
horse
of-
chestnut is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
There's still some down in the playground.
Yeah.
Well, they
Well,
do.
you
Yeah,
get a-
there is
you get
still
a
one
chestnut,
down there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of chestnut trees around town.
Oh,
Yeah.
I remember there was a big one on Muzzy Street, but that was in my childhood. So a lot of elm trees too.
yes, there were a lot of elm trees. I had a story which I would like to tell, but it's not really relevant, but I happen to remember very clearly the hurricane of 1938.
Sure, yeah.
And I was living in Parker Street at the time, and I have no memory of where everybody else was, just my mother and I were there at the time. And I was visiting a friend down in Mass Avenue when the storm came, and as far as we know, the eye came right through Lexington Center. And it was quite a storm, and my mother telephoned me about 6 o'clock that night, as we could figure out later, it must have been the eye was sitting right over
Wow.
at the common, and she said, I don't have any lights, you better get a can of Sterno. So I said, okay, I'll get a can of Sterno, and drove through the avenue, I had her car, and drove up to Martin's Drugstore. Martin's Drugstore, that's the corner of Depot Square
Oh, okay, on Mass Avenue.
on Mass Avenue. It's on the Arlington side of the
Okay.
Depot Road, right in the corner. And my memory then, and I could be wrong on this, but my memory then was you had to go up steps. That block of stores. I
That was the
remember
Hunt block, they
The
called
Hunt
it the Hunt
Block, the
block.
brick
Hunt block,
building,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, Mr. Hunt was around.
And there was a step or two to get
Yes,
in.
there
to
was.
get up.
Yeah.
And I remember I got out to get in the car with my can of Sterno, and the driver's side front window was smashed, and there was a big limb laying in the street. And I then got in the car from the other side, got in, and tried to come home, and I couldn't get home, but I did get home, and I am not able to relate exactly how I got home. I know I was in Waltham Street for a while, trying to get to the corner of Parker and Mass Avenue.
Right.
From Mass Avenue, I couldn't get there. Mass Avenue, you couldn't get the trees all over, it was a terrible mess. And somehow I think I came down Lincoln Street. How I got there and why Lincoln Street wasn't blocked off, I don't know. But I got home, and That was a hurricane.
So you probably went down Waltham Street to Park Drive to Lincoln Street and then down through there?
Yeah, I just don't
Because there
remember.
probably weren't that many trees in the park where the playgrounds were.
Maybe Park Drive didn't have me,
Right,
I don't
right.
know. I just
Well, you made it home with the sternum anyhow, huh? Tell me, Jim, do you ever get any serious trouble when you were a kid?
No.
Good boy always?
When I was a kid, the Hancock Church had a benefactress, a lady named Mrs. Lamont, lived up on Winthrop Road. Her husband was well-to-do, and she sponsored a boys' choir in Hancock Church with the whole bit, the tunics and the black robes and so forth, and the bow tie. And I sang in the boys' choir for a couple of 3 years. I was in the alto. When I stopped becoming an alto, as most things do, I no longer sang in the choir. I had a beautiful voice. And I want you to know that at one time, the choir master who came into town every day, Mrs. Lamont paid him, and at rehearsals, and he gave me $1 bill, and that was my reward for being the best behaved boy in the boys' choir.
Good for you.
So we're not gonna have any mischief
No mischief.
tales from your childhood. Okay, you were a good boy in the choir. A choir boy, we gotta remember that. Tell me, Jim, do you remember the Dudleys lived on Parker Street? Okay, perhaps it was after your time.
So Manly, Love, Scanlon was in the corner. Scanlon was the town public works
Okay,
boss. I don't know what the title is. And
Public Work Director.
Honeyman lived on the street, and Bramhall lived on the street.
Can you remember some of the businesses that were in Lexington Center? And I got one
All
specific
of
question.
them, even the one I worked in. I worked in one of them,
In the downtown business
in the
district?
downtown business district. I worked in a grocery store, and once upon a time, there were a lot of grocery stores in Lexington, believe it or not. I worked at Archie Peavy's First National. There was a side store. There was a big First National, but there was a little store right side of the, I'll say side of the movies. It probably wasn't exactly side of them, but that's the block it was in. Vienna owned the block,
Right.
and it was in that block. And Archie Peavy was an old New Englander. Lived in Packer Street or down toward the end of Packer Street. I'm not sure. My mother knew him. He went to Hancock Church. A nice old guy, a real old Yankee though, tough and nail. And he'd have a boy come in every summer and work for him. And the kid named Paul Bull worked there one year, and then he was looking. Well, Paul went somewhere else, and he was working. He was after me, and I've been going to the Cape with my mother every year, but I was getting older by then. I know I was 16 years old or something. So I decided I'd stay home in Parker Street and work for Mr. Peavy. And I did. My favorite memory there is working for Mr. Peavy. And this was the days when you were a grocery clerk. Somebody wanted something, you went to the shelf and got them down. The people would walk around like the cattle they do down. But I remember standing there one Saturday night, about 5 minutes of 9, hot, no air conditioning, nothing like that, sweat pouring down my face. A little girl came in. She came in and she said, I want a jar of mayonnaise. And she looked up at me and she went,
A jar of mayonnaise.
and she started to laugh. Look at this grotesque creature, all dirt and,
Oh, you, huh?
yeah.
What'd you get in the jar of mayonnaise?
I think I threw it at her, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so and you spent the summer working at
At Archie Peavy's.
Archie
yeah.
Peavy's, and that was on Massachusetts, somewhere by the theater.
Yes, and
Okay.
a girl named Tibiage, it was a manager of E.E. Gray, I guess was a store on the corner of Muzzy Street. And there was a Lexington Fruit, which was at the corner of Waltham and Mass Avenue on the side where the corner garage was at that time, and the Fruit moved across the street later. There was an A&P, E.E. Gray, First National, a lot of stores.
Do you remember the Rexall drugstore?
Sure, well, yeah.
Or the
There
Minuteman
were
Cafe?
several drugstores. Madden's was, I would say, was the drugstore, and the competition primarily was, I think he called it the Colonial Pharmacy, and that was Blakey.
Right, corner of Walton.
Walton, on the Waltham Street. And Blakey was quite a character, if you knew Blakey.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Blakey rented space at Jefferson for years.
And do you remember the ice cream store Partridges?
Sure, Partridge was on the corner of Edison Way, on the, on the corner of Edison
Mass
Way,
Ave.
that defines it. And
Let's move on a little bit. As you grew up, now your dad worked at Jefferson Union.
Yes,
When
sir.
did you start?
I started April 19th, 1934, I was 14 years old. And that's because Franklin Roosevelt became President of the United States, and Franklin Roosevelt was going to change things, and God knows he did. And one of the ways he changed them was he decided that things were very tough. Incidentally, if anybody ever wonders about the Great Depression, it was a great, tremendous depression. They try to say, how was it compared to what they had a couple of years ago? Not close, not even remote, nothing. That was a brutal affair, that was bad. And one of the things that was true was a lot of people had two jobs. But if you had a job, you had two. You couldn't live on what you get paid for one.
But
And
it
so-
was difficult getting jobs, wasn't it?
Oh, very, very difficult. And so what happened was Jefferson decided that they'd install a sprinkler system to prevent fires because it was a fire trap. Oil-soaked floors and it was really very bad. And part of the gimmick when you got the sprinkler system, dropped your cost of insurance drastically, but you had to have a watchman. Someone should be in the building at all times.
Right.
So they hired a night watchman, but Mr. Roosevelt would only let you work X number of hours, and if you needed more hours to work to buy groceries, he didn't care about that. He thought the man down the street should have the job. So amongst other things, what he had to do was they had to have a watchman Saturday afternoon and Sunday. 5 hours Saturday afternoon, 10 hours Sunday, when nobody was in the factory. And for that purpose, the factory superintendent, a chap named Joe Marshall, the name Joe Marshall floats around Lexington. There was more than one Joe Marshalls.
Okay.
There was a man in the fire department, there's another this Joe Marshall lived on Woburn Street, was none of the others, but he was a great guy, wonderful man, I think. And Joe had a son, Joe, going to Boston College at that time. And he got Joe, and my father got me, and they gave us the job of Saturday afternoon and Sunday. Saturday afternoon, we cleaned the latrines, oiled some of the machinery, and punched the time clock once an hour, walked around, punched the clock. And then Sunday, we didn't have to do a damn thing, but we had to be there for 10 hours, and we could study. Joe's going to BC, and they're taking Greek and Latin, God knows what, so he used to study. Because I didn't have to study, so what the hell. So I remember reading Gone with the Wind and, studying like that. But, so I always worked. I worked Saturday afternoon for 5 hours, got $3. I worked Sunday for 10 hours, got 3 hours. We got
$3.
10 hours, got $3. And Joe and I would trade off. It turned out some night one of us would have things to do, but we'd back each other. Joe and I hardly knew each other, but
It worked out.
It worked out. We shared the job, and we did for years.
But you didn't do night watchman in the middle of the night. It was
No,
just
sir.
Saturday day and
It was
Sunday
all
day.
day. Yeah, the purpose, our major purpose was to punch a time clock, and the time clock was spent all around the building inside, so you had to walk around the building. It took 10, 12 minutes to walk around and punch the clock.
Right.
So you had to do that, so you had to break into your reading, and I had to put a mark in my book and get the, I'm gonna go out and bring the punch. You don't punch it, there's a little crank that you stuck in a box, and I punched the tape.
That's just to prove you were doing your job. Now, when you graduated high school, did you stay working with the Jefferson Union?
Stan and I, no, I went to, no. I worked in a variety of places after high school, but I went to college for a year. I went to a place called Colgate University out in Hamilton, New York. Very cold, really cold. And I was not aware when I went that it was quite seriously a Baptist college. I believe that Colgate, the name is, Colgate is not the toothpaste, it's a man with a brokerage. He was a J. Willard Hayden type guy. And Mr. Colgate was a benefactor of the university which was there. And the university was there as a school to teach ministers, Baptist ministers. And I believe that what is now called Colgate Rochester, something in Rochester, I believe is a
Technical
separation
school
from
maybe or
Colgate.
something?
What? I think,
A technical school?
no, it's a divinity school.
Oh, I see.
Divinity
Okay.
school.
And I think there was a connection once, because Colgate was very Baptist oriented, and one of the things they had was chapel every day. And we won't get into a religious discussion here, but I was not that kind of a guy. And so I used to cut chapel. I didn't go. And after you didn't go enough times, they begin to penalize you, so I ended up, I didn't go back.
Okay, so you didn't go back. Let's go back to Lexington now. You mentioned a moment ago Willard Hayden. Do you
Yeah.
remember the Hayden family?
I know,
Joseph
I didn't
Willard
know,
Hayden?
I know of them, yes, I know people that know pretty well. One of my high school friends, good friend for many years, in fact, I knew him at grammar school, was a kid named Fred Spencer. His father was the town assessor. And so Mr. Spencer knew about everything about the town, and he was well known in the town affairs. And so I knew him pretty well, and I remember him talking about it, and he was chuckling because J. Willard Hayden had come to town discussing the proposed building of the skating rink and all the other stuff.
Oh, the Hayden Center.
The Hayden Center.
Right.
And Mr. Spencer was quite, because somebody wanted to take Mr. Hayden to dinner, and old Fred said, you're gonna take J. Willard Hayden to dinner and impress him? Come on!
What was, in your day growing up, Jim, what was it where the Hayden Center is now?
That was empty, except there was an orchard on the side of the hill, and my memory calls that Aldrich Hill. I have no idea why. I can't prove it. I don't know what makes the name. Was there a family that owned property there? I don't know. But the hill was there, and there was apple orchard, and then it goes down to the flat. They now play soccer and so forth in the flat. And that goes all the way over to where the pageant was, and the hill there going up to Fair Oaks, I guess. And that's all low ground.
Well, that's Baskin Hill up in the back there.
Back, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And Robinson Hill is the one on this curved road up on the side of the,
Like
Robinson,
behind Grace Chapel?
Yeah.
Is that that's Robinson Hill?
Right.
Right.
and those houses are all there, Stratham Road,
there were 5 houses there when I was young, and I guess they're still there.
right.
Mhm.
Stratham Road came down to Massachusetts Avenue before Worthing Road
Yeah,
was
that's
put
right.
through in the
Yeah.
50s.
We used to go up to, we used to play on you said the name of the hill.
Robinson?
Robinson Hill.
Right,
We
Robinson.
used to play in Robinson Hill.
Was the little grocery store at the top of the hill
Stone
there?
store,
The
Breslin
Stone store?
Kiddo Breslin had that
Yes.
store for years.
There were a lot of little neighborhood grocery stores around too.
Mom and pop stores we
Oh,
call them.
Right, mom and pop stores.
Oh, yeah.
Well, when you get back to Jefferson Union, because I think some of our viewers would be very interested in hearing more about Jefferson Union, why don't you start by telling us what it was? What did they actually do there at Jefferson Union?
Days.
Pipe unions.
You got,
Okay, so what is a pipe
for
union?
the rest of it here,
Brochure,
there's a
Products
brochure
they
that
sold.
shows it, what it looks like if you take it apart, and what kind of ways you can shape it. There's elbows and T's, and
you broke it.
thing open here.
Oh, it's greasy. So they made unions, which is pipe, some sort of pipes?
Yeah,
Mechanic.
all the carrying of liquids and has been a problem for many thousands of years. And they used to use wood, they used to use bamboo, all kind of things. And with the coming of the industrial age, they begin to make unions out of iron. And that's something, that material is called malleable iron. And that's largely the same as cast iron,
Oh,
old cast iron saws, but cast iron, if you ever dealt with it, you'll know it breaks. It's brittle. It's strong, but it's brittle.
okay.
And malleable, the word malleable indicates that the thing has undergone a further process. The iron has gone under a heat treatment process, and the heat treatment, and buried in sand, going through ovens and being heated, draws them so they no longer are brittle. And that's
And what did they use these, in what kind of,
the
like?
biggest thing this is used for was
trains
railroads.
or
Railroads.
Railroads.
There's
Oh.
there's a 2 3/8 and an inch and a quarter on every freight car ever made. There was once upon a time, and the other thing they use for is, I used to be able to go anywhere and visiting and meet the girl's father would say, "What do you do?" And I'd say what I did in the Union. He'd say, "Yeah, what the Union?" And I'd say, if you could answer with me, sir, I'll show you one. And I could. It was on this boiler or whatever. All the piping years ago with this kind of stuff. Nowadays, copper tubing. This has been replaced by copper tubing.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So it does what copper tubing does today.
Steel pipes, they have
Okay.
glass pipes, all kinds of pipes.
Now they use flex pipe, PEX, and just rubber with
Yeah.
mesh, wire mesh in them. and you-
Various types of plastic pipes,
Right.
plastic fittings.
So did you have contracts with railroad companies
No,
or?
we manufactured them and sold them to jobbing houses. Jobbing house is a high-class name for a hardware store for manufacturing.
Oh.
A wholesaler?
Jobbing, huh?
Like a wholesaler?
Yeah, the one around here is FW Webb, which is
Oh, yeah.
up in the
Middlesex
Where-
Turnpike.
Middlesex Turnpike, FW Webb.
Right.
Yeah.
I drive in there, they got a beautiful layout. I remember when they were a little outfit, but geez, it's beautiful. And that web came from FW Webb. Jefferson moved half a dozen years ago, moved to DeLand, Florida, after they left that building. They have a very small operation in DeLand, Florida. They buy their unions, mostly have them milk made to their order in China. So if you want to wonder where all your jobs went, China.
So what years was Jefferson Union manufacturing in
It came to
Lexington?
Lexington in 1903, I believe. It was founded in 1901, came to Lexington in 1903, and moved into some of the part of that building. You can see the rectangle going back, the chimney is this side of it, but that rectangle going back was 30 by 100, and that's the 2 floors, and that was the entire thing. And this other stuff was added to it, built on. And it had also a warehouse shed in back. And that stuff now has been made into 13 condominiums. If
Amazing.
you want to, if you would drive down
Yeah.
31 Fletcher Avenue, you can see the place sitting on the hill and the way it looks very nice, done a nice job. That's the thing that I got a kick out of it. When they were going to build it, they wanted to knock down the old building, and they couldn't get a permit. The town, I don't want to say what I really think of the present company, but anyhow, some of the town officials were unable to see that, and they wanted the parts of the building retained.
So they did retain parts of the building?
They
is that-
did them.
They did?
They did not.
They knocked it down and they
a
made him
mistake.
build it again.
They made a mistake,
Oh.
they knocked it down.
Right.
Right.
Making them leave that up.
But when it started there was no zoning in town, so you could put a manufacturing company right in the middle of a residential zone.
Excuse me, there was no residential section, that was there. That
Oh,
was
there
If
were
you
no
look at the
houses.
picture, there's very few
Oh,
houses.
there were no
now.
houses there?
No.
And
Oh,
why,
okay.
and it was put there, you said, to have the benefit of the Vine Brook water.
They
the
wanted
wells.
water, they wanted water available, and that was available. I don't know what, well, it was a soap factory, and what they wanted water for them, I don't know. And then it became a gear works, and it was Grant Gear Works, that's Grant Street, I think. Although Ted Wortham said that's not true, so maybe it's not true. You'll notice that down around Jefferson, all the streets have the names of the Union Generals, the Sheridan
Right.
Street, Sherman
Right.
Street, Fletcher Avenue, they're all Union Generals. And a man told my father years and years ago that there was a mistake, that the streets were not named for the Union Generals. It was just a wild coincidence. Okay, there was a family named Sherman lived there, and I knew the Shermans. I went to grammar school with Jimmy Grant. So if the Grants and Shermans were there, I'll vouch for that. And so I don't know what the true story is, but Ted Wortham, my father told Ted Wortham, he says, "Don't you believe it?"
Different stories out there. You mentioned earlier on, Jim, about other manufacturing places in Lexington. Many years ago, do you know?
Well, I
about
don't know
this?
about many years ago, but at one point in time, there were certain state inspectors, I forget now what they were inspecting for, but they were inspecting all manufacturing places in Lexington. And this is not a long, long time ago. This is probably 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. And there were three, and you'll never guess the three.
I won't guess the three.
Jefferson,
Right,
Larchmont,
Larchmont,
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Right.
Custance.
Customs, oh, because they were a mill shop.
You bet they were. Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
Those were
Okay.
four.
All right.
Well,
The
Custance
three.
moved up to Holderness, New Hampshire, and that family is still in.
What?
They're, Phil Custance, no, Steve Custance.
Steve is still there.
Is the probably the great-grandson of the original.
No,
Cousins
the
are
brothers
grand-
Ted and Howard started, as far as I know, and Bobby was Howard's son.
And you went to school with Bob Custance,
Bobby and I
right?
went to school, all through school together.
Okay.
I looked for him in that picture. He was a year or so older, so he made me kids used to get kept back in those days, you know that?
Right.
They'd get pushed out, and the mother couldn't stand any longer, and they'd send to school, and they wouldn't be really mature enough, so there was no kindergartens, of course, so.
Oh, I see, so they kept the
So,
baby.
so,
Okay.
but
And
anyhow, Bobby and I know each other for years, yeah. Bobby had a little cardboard box, and it had chessmen, and you could use the chess, you could punch them, there were little holes, you could punch them in the box. And in school, we'd have different classes. In the morning, he'd have it, and he'd make his move, and we'd pass in a card, and he'd hand me the box. So I'd go in with a class, and I'd think, what the hell am I doing? And I'd punch my head, then the class would change, so we'd go out, well, we'd walk past each other, so Bobby go and make his move.
You had a whole class to make your chess move, huh?
Yeah, we had a whole class, you could really think the thing through.
Did you get the game done before the school day was over?
I don't pay much attention to school bill. So,
So you were with the union as a child, we were a watchman for them, and then now, you got out in 1937, and the war came along in 41 and 42?
No, the walk, I went a year to Colgate, and it didn't pan out. And at that time, and I don't, you probably know more about this than I do, but at that time, the Lexington was wonderful college scholarships. And every kid in Lexington who were born in Lexington, and which I was, and parents were born in Massachusetts, I think, or in New England, or something, that type of restriction, all got money for scholarships. There were different kinds of scholarships. One of them was for graduating from college with a chemical engineering degree, and that was a pretty good payer. A friend of mine who was not interested in chemical engineering, but didn't have any money and wanted to go to college and was very smart, he went in for that, and he became he took chemical engineering. I don't think he ever went to work as it one, but he got the big scholarship. But the scholarship that I got, which everybody could have, just by getting in, was $250 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And $250 a year, as it so happened at that time, Colgate was $450. That was a kind of a country club sort of place. It's just, but I transferred to Tufts, as Tufts was $250, the tuition. So I had my tuition paid, and I lived off my father. So I still worked my weekends, so I had my money to go to the hockey game. My father fed me and heated me. And
So you took the train from Lexington Center to get to Tufts?
no,
How did you get there?
I bought my mother's car.
Oh, you drove over to Somerville or Medford to Tufts?
To Medford, yeah.
Yes, you were there.
Yeah.
And did you
Only for-
graduate from Tufts?
No, I was there a semester, but
Oh,
I got
just-
in probation there. I could get in probation anywhere.
Yeah, right.
My parents were too happy. My brother's Phi Beta out of Dartmouth. My sister's a school teacher out of Middlebury.
And you were just a renegade. You were a maverick kind of
I
guy.
was not.
But you did well for yourself. And tell us how you took over
Yeah.
the union.
Yeah.
When did you work after
Well,
your
I worked there.
school years or the war?
I went, after college, I did a lot of different things for 4 or 5 years, for 4 years I'll say. And one of them was I worked at there was a little airport over in Revere where the Northeast Trade Center is or something now. There's some kind of stores, and that was a little airport where they taught flying. And at the time the war's just ending, and some of the ROTC students in Northeastern and Harvard were subsidized by the Air Corps.
Jim, tell us a few good stories about your high school years in Lexington.
I had a wonderful time in high school. I somehow got involved in almost everything that existed. I started off in grammar school. My last year in grammar school, the boy that was on the top of the pile with his hands out, Jimmy Manley and I, were chosen by the principal, who was a new woman principal. It was her first year in Lexington, it was the 6th grade, to bring the flag out, raise it in the morning, and lower it at night and bring it in. And there was a flag on the flagpole in the middle of the playground, right in the middle of Hancock. Right. And Jim and I did that for a year. And we enjoyed it, and we had parts of the color guard uniform, and there's a young man in town who had some things to say about the color guard not too long ago in the paper I saw. And I don't remember his name. He writes, has pictures. I think he does other things, and he's does very well. I'm not trying to knock him at all, but he had a couple of things not quite right, and I was interested in that. And I had a picture of me in a color guard uniform, but I couldn't find it. So.
So, how about high school? How good was high school? High school was on Massachusetts Avenue, where the condominiums are now,
yes,
right?
Sir, yes,
okay.
Sir, yes, sir. And I walked to school most of the time. And once in a while, my father was going to work. I might bum a ride as far as Jefferson, but.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I
you had to walk the rest of it. That's not far.
And I was very busy. I hated French. I couldn't speak it. It's all Greek to me. So.
French is all Greek to you, right?
I got that in.
It was good. It was good. Don't forget that other one you wanted to get in.
I'll get that in.
All right.
But any other thing I did well, and one thing was physics. Another kid and I, we were entrusted with the barograph, and we used to get the National Weather Report, the map every morning, and we had a report for Lexington High School for the whole senior year. I was in a play.
And the name of the play?
A Message from Khufu. Khufu was ostensibly one of the Egyptian pharaohs.
What was the message?
We opened the coffin, if you want I'll give you the plot. We opened the coffin, and it was arranged so a little light, greenish light went on, and everybody fell dead.
The green monster, huh?
the other people, well, one of the other actors, there were 4 boys with the actors, and one of the other boys was a boy named Joe Vaughn. And I want to mention Joe because Joe and I ended up doing lots of things together. And his father had worked at Jefferson, but Joe was a postman at the time, Joe Sr., and he was a postman of the Woburn Street area, and he was very well known, well liked. He walked the area for years. And Lexington had a system in those days, and they have something like it now, where the Rotary Club invites 2 seniors each month for 6 months of the year to the Rotary luncheons. And when I was a senior, I was chosen as one of the seniors, and Joe was the other one, the time when I went. And that's how I got to know Clarence Walker, who was the president of the Lexington Trust Company, and he became quite friendly with me, and I had a lot to do with him, and that's how I ended up learning a lot about the market. That's another story. And so Joe and I were quite in that together. Joe and I were also the co-editors of the Spotlight, which was the Lexington literary newspaper. I don't know if they still publish it or not, but what we did was we gave copies of the Spotlight to the Lexington Historical Society. If they preserved them, I think somebody would love to dig in the spring, if they have those available, because my memory is we had a poll of the students on the presidential election between Franklin Roosevelt and Alf Landon. And my memory is an absolute landslide for Landon.
Really?
That's my memory, and people tell me I'm crazy, it couldn't
And
be.
this was in your high school years,
Yeah.
back in the 30s?
Yeah,
Okay, because Roosevelt first was president in 32. This must have been a re-election effort of
Yeah.
Roosevelt's?
yeah, it's the next election,
Okay.
because after that it was Wendell Willkie.
So let's get back onto the union because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not many manufacturing places existed. So you became the owner of the union when? What year did you become the actual owner of the company?
I bought the stock from the company in 1957.
And you would have been
You
about,
became the president at that point when you had
I
bought
owned
the
it,
stock.
yeah, no, I did. One thing is that I worked there for a number of years, so I knew the business. I knew the business cold. And I repaired the machine, I knew how to repair the machinery. I mean, I knew everything,
Yeah.
everything. Couldn't, and
how many employees did you have?
varied a lot. It was always up and down, up and down. The most I think I ever had was maybe 18, and the least I ever had was probably 8. It would change, vary quite a lot.
Did you just work an 8-hour shift at the union or did you run
Yeah.
into the evenings?
Oh, no. No, it was usually an 8-hour day. When I first started, it was during the war I was there, and of course there was more hours there during the war. Like, Jefferson got very busy during the war. A lot of the unions were used on ships, and we did a lot of business with Bath Iron Works. They were making DEs, destroyer escorts, and we would ship them a lot of unions. And Jefferson received an E from the Navy, a naval E for excellence in the performance of its duties. And as a result of that, I kept having I had a deferment from service. I was not a full.
Okay, so you would have been about 20, 22 years old and you had a deferment. You mentioned that the other day,
Yeah.
that you felt that, people were looking at you
Well, they
funny
did.
in
I'm
town.
walking around town, everybody's brother and son are off in the war, and there's Freeman walking around town fat and sassy. They didn't like that much.
But you did end up doing some military time.
Yeah, because my deferment was dropped eventually. At the time, we were very busy, and I was in maintenance, and keeping the machinery running, and it was a legitimate thing. If they wanted the unions, there were thousands of people who had deferments for a variety of reasons, but they were doing presumably jobs which were part of the build-up of
The war effort.
material. And so I was deferred, and
So those are the busy years for the union during the war.
very busy.
And did the business stay strong all through the 50s and 60s?
No, it did not.
It started to decline.
Yeah, when I say this from memory, was at the end of the war, there were 23 companies in America which made unions, and now there's 3.
Okay. And you kept the business and it declined over the years because
Yes.
of the lack or the demand for the union?
That's correct.
But you sold it in the early 90s?
I know in 76, 77,
You sold it.
I was through. I wanted to get through. I didn't care about it. I wasn't getting anywhere. My wife and I had no kids, and I had no ever to play golf, so the hell with it. So people, there were about a dozen working there at the time, and there was a chap who ran the factory who knew all how to do it, and there was another chap who ran the office, and they, as partners, came to me and they said they'd like to buy it, so I said, sure, I'll sell it to you. Of course, they didn't have any money, so we had to arrange how we'd get that done, and so I kept the property, and at the time, I'd been little by little as time went on after I get the business and get a little money, I got doing other things, so I bought the lot, little block of 6 stores at the corner, 7 stores at the corner of Independence Avenue and Mass Avenue in East Lexington. There's a tailor shop and that kind of stuff. I bought that little block, and I bought this across the street. There was a little office building. It looks like it's 1 story, but the below ground is the 2nd story. And that was Paul McCormick, the lawyer, that built that office building, and I bought that. So Jefferson bought both of them. Jefferson then had its factory building, its door blocks,
So you had a real estate investment trust going
right.
on.
So what happened in the end was when I didn't sell any property. I kept all the property and I renamed it James O. Freeman Inc. And I sold the name Jefferson to the two guys who were going to run the business as partners. A man named Cullen, who used to be a teacher here, he had a thing in which children did projects, and one of the projects he had 4 or 5 years ago, well, each child was to look up and write about some Lexington landmark. The Lexington
Colin.
Colin.
Yeah, Dick
Oh,
Colin.
Dick Colin.
Yeah,
Right.
Yes.
Lexington Historical Society, I
Right.
was a Larry Whipple Scholarship.
Right.
And a girl named Sarah Keeping, who lived across the street in Fletcher Avenue, prepared and wrote it. I have a copy. The Historical Society has a copy. This is Larry,
Yeah.
this is what she wrote as a paper, and she won first prize.
And this was about the history of the Jefferson Union.
History of the Jefferson Union. She had, for her history, she got $500, and I was so thrilled that I added another 1,000.
Oh,
She got
it was nice
$300
of
for
you.
writing this
Yeah.
paper.
Good.
That's something she'll always
That's
remember and
wonderful.
appreciate.
Whether or not
Right.
the Historical Society has copies, I bet they probably do. And I know there's a copy in Cary, I feel sure there's a copy in Cary Library.
Sure.
Good, but she did a very fine
She did a good
job. I'm
job.
very proud.
Well, that's a good story to end with, so thank you very much,
It's been
Jim,
a
for
pleasure,
being here
Jim.
today. It's been very much a pleasure.